Control the language, shape the mind. Dictate the culture, keep the masses blind. The party's hand, it moves unseen, altering words, reshaping the scene. They twist the truth, they bend the light, crafting their narrative out of sight. Every term they redefine to serve their purpose, to toe their line. Everything means capitalism in their parallel tongue, it's their prism, whispered in socialist code. The truth obscured, the meanings erode. From bourgeoisie to equity, saying their language weaves the twisted game. Each word a tool, each phrase a ploy to cloak the truth in their employ. Bourgeoisie oppressors they claim, equity's their utopia's name. Whiteness, racism, systemic fly, all roads lead back to their abolition fight. Fascism dubbed as free market stream, abolishing individual liberties, their scheme. Normativity, patriarchy's grip, all intertwined, their narrative flip. Everything means capitalism in their parallel tongue, it's their prism, whispered in socialist code. The truth obscured, the meanings erode. From bourgeoisie to equity, saying their language weaves the twisted game. Each word a tool, each phrase a ploy to cloak the truth in their employ. Queer and trans, they declare the war on capitalism's norm, their discourse. Gender binary, the nuclear family's home. Their destruction is the goal. Imperialism, colonization's reign. Decolonization to break the chain. The police, enforcers, their name. Guardians of capital, their claim. Their language shapes, their rhetoric binds, to break the cycle, to free our minds. For in their words, their hidden game, capitalism's grip, they aim to tame. Everything means capitalism in their parallel tongue, it's their prism, whispered in socialist code. The truth obscured, the meanings erode. From bourgeoisie to equity, saying their language weaves the twisted game. Each word a tool, each phrase a ploy to cloak the truth in their employ. Control the language, control the crowd, but in our hearts the truth is loud. Their words may twist, their meanings bend, but in the end our voices ascend.
Well, hey everyone, welcome back. We are spy streaming. Has anyone not been to a spy stream before? We are on a time crunch, guys, because spy stream is when we go inside a live, I repeat, live leftist training. If you've never been to a spy stream with me before, these are usually, almost always now, supporter only exclusive. So this is a very, very rare public spy stream. I think I've only done one other public spy stream this year. And so if you want to regularly get invited to spy stream, we do actually do them on a fairly regular basis. Head over to my Substack on Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. Link is going to be in the description below, and sign up as a supporter for $8 a month, $80 a year. You will get access to the full spy stream archives, but this is a rare public one because I don't think we're going to get caught. I think it's going to be okay. It's a busy day. The debate's going on. But so this is a rare special occasion, but we're going to do it because I just got this link earlier today. I didn't feel like setting up a supporter exclusive. So we're doing it live. If you have never been to a spy stream before, in about 3 minutes, we're going to start a live woke training. they do not know we're watching their training. This is inside. It's like you're a fly on the wall and you can hear what the left talks about when they think you're not around, because this is live. I don't know what they're going to say. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know if they are going to kick us out. I don't know if they're going to find out that we're streaming and get mad at us. I don't know if they're going to have technical difficulties. I cannot troubleshoot your technical difficulties because this is a live training. Number two, I will not be doing commentary over the training because I actually do want to watch the training and listen to it, but I will chat in. And if it's appropriate, I will be displaying the chats on the screen that I send at the given, like just depending on the timing of the training, but I will be chatting into the training. I will try to duplicate my chats on Rumble if you're watching over there. But we, of course, want to remember that this is our recording of the training. I do want your commentary as well as we're watching the training. Number three, if you are kind enough to send in a super chat, I will acknowledge your super chat. I just won't do it during the training. So I do, of course, appreciate all super chats. This is a rare public training. So if you wouldn't mind, throwing me a super chat, $3, $5, whatever, to show your appreciation that I'm taking you inside a training that no one else is showing you, feel free to send in a super chat. I will acknowledge it at the end. I do promise, but just not while the training is live. And of course, please smash the like button, spy the like button, do whatever you want to the like button. Let the like button know that you're enjoying this experience tonight. But let me get the Zoom link up and let me just make sure. Okay, I'm not even going to tell you what it is because I don't want to tempt fate, but let me just get this training up and running so everyone shh. What the fuck? It's having me sign up again. Hang on. I've seen them do this before. Okay, hang on. Looks like we should be getting started any minute. Just hang on. I might have to be quiet just to make sure that everything is running and stuff like that. So, hey, Benjamin, I do appreciate it. Thanks so much. If there are times I'm being quiet, guys, it's because I have to be. So I apologize because I don't want to reveal my secret identity. They should be getting started any minute. This, by the way, will go till 8:30, and then we are debate streaming later. So this should end half hour before the debate. So no one needs to worry about missing it. Just waiting for them to get started. Hope everyone's having a good night. We're just waiting, waiting, waiting. Oh yeah, that's happened before. Oh yeah, they've called me out mid-training. They've kicked me out. One time we actually did a multi-week training and they found out I was streaming it after the first week and they still kept going and they were like, "Fuck you, we're going to do it anyway." And I was like, "All right, well, fine." They've issued copyright strikes to me. They really like they sometimes no, I've covered this topic extensively, Taylor. You can come to one of my streams and ask me about it, but they do not mean white people. And the left knows they don't mean white people. It's only the right that knows that doesn't. The left understands that when they say whiteness, they mean capitalism. It is the right that believes that they mean white people when they really don't. But I'm happy to talk about that another day. I'm not happy to talk about it right now. I'm not going to tell you right now because, quite frankly, this is if this was a private spy stream, I would tell you. But because it's public, I don't want to give anyone any hint because I don't want to. I actually want to be able to watch the training, and if I tell you who it is, that might get disrupted for me. So I can't tell you right now, Carol, but you'll be able to see. When I basically do supporter exclusives for this stuff now, just because it cuts down on people who are trying to make my life difficult, like telling the organizers that they're being streamed. But it's with this one, I really don't think this is going to be a problem, but like with some of them, it's a problem. And yeah, snitches get stitches, exactly. But also,
recording in progress.
Give everybody just 1 minute here to get in from the waiting room. Okay, well, welcome. So excited to have everybody here tonight. If this is your first event with Red, Wine, and Blue, then we are so glad to have you here. My name is Julie Womack. I'm the head of organizing. I'm here with Julie Collins, who is our national organizer. I saw Amanda Pauley jumping in here, who is our deputy director in Pennsylvania. So if you're in Pennsylvania, she's somewhere in here. I saw her name. I am really excited to have everybody here tonight and to have this presentation. We have 3 amazing speakers. Also, I normally do announcements at the top to tell you what's coming up next week, but next week's the 4th of July, so we're not doing much except having a little bit of a holiday. So no events next week, but I will drop the link in the chat for you guys to check out the upcoming events in July. And I am also going to drop a link in the chat. Our 3 speakers have amazing bios, and if I read their entire bios, we would be here for 20 minutes doing that. So I have a document, and I'm going to drop that in the chat, of their full bios if you want to learn more about them. But to start, I'm just going to say thank you to Kellen Baker. Dr. Kellen Baker is the executive director of Whitman Walker Institute, which leverages research, policy, and education to advance health equity nationwide, with a particular focus on LGBTQ+ populations and people living with HIV. Kellen has 20 years experience in health equity research and policy at the state, national, and international levels. And then Adrian Kimmel is the founder of Spark Solutions, a strategic consulting firm at the intersection of communication, psychology, and politics, a pioneer in messaging research grounded in behavioral and cognitive science. She has helped create an understanding of the interplay between emotional and voting behavior, which is pretty cool. And as NARAL, Pro-Choice America's acting president, they're now called Reproductive Freedom for All, in case you guys did not know that NARAL changed their name. She's the acting president and chief research and communications officer. So we are really thrilled to have them both here tonight, and I am going to kick it over to them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you so much for having us as your pre-debate warm-up act. So I'm sure everybody is settling in for a scintillating evening of discussion about political issues happening across the country. We are very appreciative to have the opportunity to talk with you all today about one of the main issues that keeps coming up in discussions around the state of America and what is happening for communities across the country. And in this particular case, talking about transgender people. So what you're going to hear today is an overview of messaging research that we have been doing as part of a collaborative that we have called the Transgender Freedom Alliance. And this is a national enterprise, if you will, or a national organization of folks, not a formal organization. I'm getting myself all mixed up here, but it is a group of us who have come together as a coalition of the willing to do the work that we really think needs to be done, to think through how do we discuss issues affecting transgender people, particularly in the current politicized environment where we are hearing a lot of, honestly, pretty tough things about who transgender people are and what medical care for transgender people needs to look like. The Transgender Freedom Alliance, as I mentioned, is a coalition of a couple of folks who represent different organizations, different components of what is really a nationwide effort to make sure that transgender people can be who they are and access the care that they need safely, and with the support for young people of their parents and for folks of any age with their healthcare providers and the broader community. I am Kellen Baker. As you heard, I am the executive director of Whitman Walker Institute. I am a member of the steering committee for this project. I am joined by some incredibly brilliant colleagues, not just Adrian and David, whom you see on the call tonight, But folks like Mara Kiesling, who is the founding executive director of the National Center for Transgender Equality, Lene Erickson with Third Way, Casey Sepperdini, who is with the Trevor Project, and Sean Lund, who helps oversee messaging for the Movement Advancement Project. So what you're getting here is a coalition of folks who've come together with different areas of expertise. We're very fortunate tonight to be joined by Adrienne, who's going to share some of her expertise in messaging research. I am here as the pointy-headed nerd. I am a PhD in health services research and policy from Johns Hopkins, where my work has focused on transgender health. As you heard from Julie, I have been doing transgender health research and policy for 20 years. And so have a fairly decent sense of what's true and what's not true when it comes to the things that are being said about transgender people. We are also working on expanding our work to encompass not just some of the baseline messaging that you will be hearing about tonight, some of the things that we can put out there in the world in conversation that will help focus people on the things that matter and help reframe some of the discussions about transgender people. We are also working on some tough questions. We all know that there are a lot of tough questions out there that folks might get when talking about transgender issues, and we are here to help. We have spent a lot of time working in coalition to think through what are some of the major questions that keep coming up about transgender identities, transgender people and communities, healthcare for transgender people, sports participation, facilities access. What are some of those questions and what are some of the facts that we know? Because even though there are some folks who would like to think or like to move us in the direction of the United States being a post-fact country, there are actually some things, a lot of things that we know about these topics. And we think that it's really important for all of you and all of the folks in your networks to have access to the truth. Knowing again how difficult it is sometimes to engage in these conversations with the degree of politics that gets thickly overlaid on discussions of what I hope we can all remember are real people's lives. Myself, for example, I grew up in Southern California in the 1980s, and that sounds super chill and fun, except one, I don't surf, and two, I am transgender. And I grew up as somebody who was supposed to be a girl in the 1980s and 1990s. I didn't have the words to describe why that didn't quite feel right to me. There were plenty of people, unfortunately, in my life who were all too happy to tell me that something was wrong with me, but nobody really knew how to describe who transgender people are or what transgender people might need in terms of access to healthcare or the ability to just participate in everyday life. And so I was actually able to transition from female to male in Moscow, Russia. I was working there as a translator. My undergraduate majors, since you didn't ask, but I will supply them anyway, were Russian and astrophysics. It's really amazing what untreated gender dysphoria, meaning just the ability to, or the inability to get the care and the help and support that I needed. It's amazing what folks will do to try to just make a way and try to figure out how to get through the day. And for me, it was hiding. It was hiding in academics. It was hiding in being silent and really not having a voice for who I am and how I want to bring myself to the world. So I, as I say, transitioned in Moscow in around 2004, 2005. I came back to the States in 2008. And if you talked with anybody who knew me in high school or in college, I literally never said a single word that wasn't required of me because I literally did not have a voice for who I am as a person. And it is access to the type of care that we are talking about today that has given me that voice. And I think that it is imperative that and I'm so appreciative of all of you, being prepared to raise your voices in support of transgender people. The fact that it was easier for me 20 years ago in Moscow, Russia, to get the healthcare that I need than it is for transgender young people in literally half of US states right now. Over the last 2 years, we have seen 25 US states ban best practice medical care for transgender young people. And many of those bans are coming for transgender adults as well. So this is a deeply personal issue for me. It is my personal journey. It is my professional expertise. And one of the things that we know is that unfortunately, a lot of times folks who are in the business of making laws about transgender people do not have either that personal connection or that professional expertise. And so what we hope to do tonight is to share with you some of the findings of the research work that Adrienne and her team have been doing, that I and others have been participating in as steering committee members of the Transgender Freedom Alliance, to help us talk through what these issues are, why they matter, and in some cases, why they don't matter. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm very important, but transgender issues should not be the defining feature of the US political landscape right now. And the fact that they are represents a very serious perversion of government. And as you will hear from Adrienne, they represent the advancement of an agenda of compliance and control that has its roots in one political party's efforts to make private medical decisions, really personal decisions, away from individuals, our families, and our healthcare providers. So I'm very honored to have the time with you all tonight. I will be here as a subject matter expert to answer any questions that folks have about transgender issues, sort of broadly speaking. If you have any particular questions about any of the underlying issues, I am here to help. But I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Adrienne, to talk through the work that we have been doing to think through how do we talk about these issues in a way that folks who may not have ever met a transgender person. I mean, there aren't that many of us, so we try, but we're not like Santa Claus. We can't make it to every single home in a single night. So I'm very pleased to have Adrienne with us to share some of those insights into how to introduce these topics for folks who may not have had the opportunity to think much about them or to talk about them before. So thank you, and over to you, Adrienne.
Thank you so much, Kellen. Excuse me, and thanks everyone for being here this evening, or maybe early evening, depending on where you're located. It is always hard to go after Kellen, especially given that I don't think I barely made it through high school chemistry, much less astrophysics. So really excited to be working with him and David and the rest of our team on this really important work. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Excuse me one second. And there we go. Hopefully that should look okay to folks. So Adrienne Kimmel, she, her, one of the co-leaders, along with all of our group that Kellen outlined, of the Transgender Freedom Alliance. And I'm going to skip one slide here and just give you a little bit of a readout of some of the research we've been doing and some of our message recommendations to date, and then also share with you where we are in our research project and what you can expect from us if you'll have us back in the near future. So as Kellen mentioned, there has been significant research that's been done around the issue of transgender rights and how to message, but we still needed and felt it was important to ensure that elected officials, candidates, and others had really clear, concise messages that they could use to answer questions, to inoculate against these attacks, and so on. As a result, we wanted to get messages to people sooner than later. And so we did kind of a landscape analysis of really important work done by Third Way, done by Movement Advancement Project, and by others We tested that through a tool called Grow Progress that some of you might be familiar with, and then later through another tool called Blue Rose. Moral of the story is those are platforms that allow us to engage in these kind of small randomized controlled trials to understand what messages people are responding to and what messages move people. All of the messages I'm about to show you boosted support in a house horse race in the Blue Rose platform, meaning they were successful. Okay. So I'm going to move us along quickly so we have time to answer questions and have a conversation to some of the messages that were most effective in the work that we've done to date. Excuse me. The first one is around solving problems versus creating panic. And this message you'll see, I call it kind of our sandwich message, in that we start with kind of an economic message and we end with an economic message here. This message says Americans are working hard to make ends meet, and we need real solutions to real problems, not distractions. And while Republicans are focused on creating a big panic around transgender kids, I'm focused on raising incomes and lowering costs for working families. So you can see here, we end with a pivot to the economy, and we raise to people what we know to be true through polling, through conversations, through our qualitative research that I'll tell you about shortly, which is that, and Kellen mentioned this as well, this is really not an issue where generally Americans or voters are wanting to focus their attention. They're worried, as you all know, about how do we pay the bill? How do I afford college? How do I, any of these kind of quote unquote kitchen table economic issues. And that's where people want their politicians to be focused as well. People want solutions to the problems that they're feeling on the day to day. And we also bring out here in this message that Republicans or certain politicians are focused on creating a big panic, right? They're trying to drum up this intensity, this anxiety, this feeling of chaos for people intentionally. And we tested, we tested big panic, false panic, you name it, every different kind of panic. Big panic happened to test best, but the idea here is it's this manufactured panic, right? And then we want people to focus on the economic issues that folks are worried about on the day-to-day. This next message here talks about a few things. I'll read it to you, and then I'll pull out some of these things that I've highlighted in this kind of pinkish color, which is that I'm focused on issues that affect all Americans, like making sure our children's schools are funded and they have access to the mental health resources they need, instead of stigmatizing transgender kids or interfering with families' private medical decisions. So a few things to pull out here, talking about funding schools, talking about mental health resources. These are things that basically, for the most part, everyone can agree on. People want to see these things happen. And it also creates what we call an abundance mindset, right? So we're not a scarcity mindset. So it means all kids, yes, transgender kids, but all kids need access to these important things: funded schools, mental health resources, instead of stigmatizing transgender kids. So we originally thought bullying was going to be the most effective word here, because it has been effective in the past. But we did test that against stigmatizing, and our best guess about why stigmatizing perhaps tested better is because people don't want to be called bullies, right? When you talk about bullying kids, it might be like, well, I'm not a bully of kids. That's a terrible thing to be, right? So this is a little bit of a different frame that is less kind of finger pointy or waggy at people. And then we pivot here to what many of you might find familiar if you're used to messaging on reproductive rights or reproductive freedom, is interfering with families' private medical decisions. So generally speaking, Americans do not like interfering, politicians interfering, so we want to draw that out in this message, and it certainly was effective here. Just move us to our next message. So speaking of reproductive freedom, this message definitely takes from that movement and that messaging and actually directly references abortion bans relevant today, from our non-decision on emergency care. This message says we all deserve the freedom to make decisions about our lives, futures, and families. But certain politicians are taking away our freedoms. They're banning abortion and banning parents from making healthcare decisions about their own children. The politicians behind these attacks don't support freedom. Their agenda is compliance and control, which you heard Kellen say earlier, right? So we're using a freedom framework. It's important to note here that this freedom framework is powerful. This is actually our best testing message. It is less effective of a frame when you're talking about young people. Talking about people writ large, yes, it is powerful. We also kind of do a little bit of turning the parents' rights framework on its head, talking here about banning parents from making healthcare decisions about their own kids, right? So that's kind of the antithesis of freedom. You're not allowing parents to do what they feel is best for their kids, their families. And then again, using the same framework from reproductive freedom, this is about control, it's about compliance, it's not about freedom. So very antithetical here also to kind of core American values. Another thing to note about this message, while it's very effective, it does not say the word transgender anywhere in this message. And so that could certainly be one of the reasons it tested really well. And thinking about using this as a response, just be mindful that it doesn't say, it's not specifically focused on transgender folks, although it's alluded to, it is not specific like some of the other messages you'll hear today. The next message addresses healthcare, and you'll notice I did not call it gender affirming care, but rather healthcare or healthcare for transgender people. And there is an intentional reason for that, which is we have tested, our colleagues at the Movement Advancement Project have tested, and while many of us are familiar now with the term gender affirming care, it is less effective of a framework or term than healthcare for transgender people, medical care for transgender people. Sometimes it can be send an inaccurate message that gender affirming care means that there is no evaluation or this is a very quick process. These are all things that we're working to debunk because that's actually not accurate. As Kellen could probably tell us based on his extensive knowledge in this issue, but that's actually not how the process works. So we want to kind of debunk that and use a healthcare frame, and it is healthcare. So that's another reason to use that framework. So this message says all Americans should have the freedom to live their private lives without government interference. Decisions about a transgender child's healthcare should be between that child's parents and their doctor. Politicians have no business overruling parents and interfering in a family's private medical decisions. So you'll see a few things here in this message that I've shown you in some of the others before that, which is a freedom frame, government interference, interfering in families' private medical decisions, and again, this same kind of flip on its head of a parents' right framework, which is politicians shouldn't be getting between a child's parents and their doctor. They shouldn't be overruling parents. In fact, that's kind of the opposite, one could argue, of parents' rights. So that this message kind of does a few different things. And again, just wanted to note the difference between gender affirming care versus healthcare as a framework. Okay, now this is a little bit of a toughie. This is definitely an issue where the right has really dug in and spent a lot of their energy, which is around sports. And a few things just to remember when talking about sports for transgender kids or transgender folks. One is we want to emphasize participation, the benefits of sports for everyone. What you can learn from sports, how you can grow as a person through sports, and move away from messages around competition, elite competition, athletic achievement, which we recognize is hard because it's a wild world out there, even for kids' sports. But moving people away from that kind of mental template of these really elite sports is important. And then also being aware that there is a fairly newly proposed Title IX regulation through the Biden administration, which forbids categorically banning transgender young people from playing on teams according to their gender, but also allows local school authorities to set rules about who can and can't play to make sure there's a level playing field. So there is that newer regulation, which is just noteworthy here. This message says kids learn a lot of important life lessons in sports like leadership, confidence, self-respect, and teamwork. local schools across the nation are already updating rules to ensure a level playing field while also protecting transgender kids. And while Republicans are trying to distract us by making this election about transgender people, I'm focused on raising incomes and lowering costs for working families. So a few things here. We're talking about local schools. We're not talking actually about a federal regulation. We're talking about local schools, local, even sports authorities, you could say, are updating rules. So things are in process. This is an evolving topic, right? This is new for a lot of people. So the fact that there is an evolution, people are getting more information, they're evolving their rules. But the end goal here is a level playing field while also protecting transgender kids. And that part of the message is really important, because if we have a period after level playing field, it really could be interpreted, certainly by the right, as exclude transgender kids from playing sports. We're talking about a level playing field and protecting and including transgender kids. So we are explicit about that in this message. Again, you'll see some of the things that were in the first message. Republicans are trying to distract us when the real focus needs to be on raising incomes and lowering costs for working families. So we go back to that pivot, that economic pivot in this sports message as well. I'm just going to, before I pass it over to David, I'm just going to share with you a little bit about where we are and what's to come, which I teased a little bit before we got into these messages. We have been sharing some of these tested messages. We've been going much deeper into understanding how people relate to all of the issues we've raised today and more. We started with a metaphor elicitation with worthy strategies, where kind of is what it sounds like. We use metaphors to help understand how people relate and feel about transgender rights and transgender issues. We moved on to focus groups across the country, where we got a lot of information about, again, what messages kind of work, what messages are less effective, and what we can do moving forward. And then we're now in, as we speak, we're in a quantitative and final phase of a poll. So that means in the next few weeks, we will have much more updated, even more thoroughly researched messages to share with all of you. If you will have us back, which we would love. So all that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass the mic over to the fearless David Steinglass, who's brought us all together and a passionate advocate at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrienne. And thank you, everybody, both for inviting us to join you guys, for joining us on this evening. We'll try and get you warmed up and optimistic ahead of the debate. We promise not to scream or say really crazy stuff, so we've got that going for us. And I also want to say a heartfelt thank you to all of you for the work that you've been doing, which has been an inspiration, certainly to me, on a bunch of different levels, which I think will become apparent as I talk about what I've been up to. So I'm a parent. I have 3 kids. As I was thinking about how to approach this evening, my wife mentioned a quote from the Iranian poet Kaveh Akbar, which is basically, don't ask the person what they do, but who they love. And I love my kids. And my middle son transitioned 4 years ago. And so his experience against the backdrop of what's been happening in this country to the transgender community, first as a political, rhetorical football, and then as the target of truly pernicious legislation that, as Kellen pointed out, has now rendered it close to impossible in half the states in the country for trans minors to get the healthcare they need, the life-sustaining healthcare that they need, brought me into what I'm doing now, which is basically full-time advocacy for transgender people. I always remind myself that it's not for my kid, and that it's really for all of our kids, which extends quite broadly and frankly, not just to trans people. But if you take one thing from this, one of many from this conversation, it's that trans folks are just the ones that the far right has focused on right now. to drive a wedge through our coalition of civil society. And once successful, they'll just keep on driving that wedge deeper. So I'm here to talk about my own personal journey in this work. And to some extent, what you just heard from Kellen and Adrian has been a really central part of that work, which is really to try and lift up the voices of parents and loved ones of trans people. You guys have all had lots and lots of conversations in which parents' rights are wielded as a cudgel against progressive values, against our freedoms. And early on in my journey, somebody suggested that I try and organize the parents of trans kids because we're part of those groups, just like so many of you reacting to book bans or the perversion of how history is taught in the name of parents' rights, wonder, well, which parents? And so that's sort of been my animating question. And back to the quote from the Iranian poet, the sort of credo that really has resonated for me both in my work and as a parent is what a mom said to me after her kid told her that he was trans in his early 20s. She and her husband committed to love and support before understanding. And so in a way, the messages that you've heard Adrian describe are about trying to get folks to connect to this question and connect to this community as parents. And most parents, not all, but most parents would, first of all, want to be able to love and support their kids. And certainly would not want somebody else telling them that they weren't entitled to do that. So let me just give you a little bit of my background because it's sort of a funny story. I started my career out after college as a housing organizer and a labor organizer. I was a very bad organizer. This is, again, one of the reasons I appreciate so much what you guys have been able to do with the networks that you've created. I went to law school and I came out the other side of law school and found myself working in private equity. And I spent 25 years doing that. And my wife, Liz, and I had our 3 kids and we're raising our 3 kids here in Washington, D.C. And when Trump was elected president, like so many of you, our world was turned upside down. Our reaction was to start supporting organizations that were looking out to protect the different groups that the Trump administration was clearly going to come after. And then also, where possible, supporting Democratic candidates running for Congress. But we did all of this at an arm's length. And what sort of jolted me out of that sense of complacency was the Dobbs decision, which both on its face, what it did in terms of reproductive freedom, but also in terms of what it portended for the rest of the things that we had come to take a little bit for granted as freedoms that were founded in or based on our constitutional order, that the Dobbs majority was basically saying we're all up for grabs. I'm sure you're all aware, many of you aware, that this week the Supreme Court, or last week, the Supreme Court granted cert to hear a case from Tennessee that had successfully challenged bans on healthcare for trans people in Tennessee, only to be overruled by the Sixth Circuit. And so this court that has continued to chip away, if not just completely wipe away rights, is now got the trans community firmly at its sights. So I left my job and started trying to find a way to connect with other folks similarly minded, and one by one met parents of trans folks and then also trans donors. So we've now organized a group of 17 of us across the country, 14 sets of parents and 3 sets of 3 trans donors. We've helped support this project that Adrian and her partner John Neffinger have run so well. We've met with a lot of candidates and elected officials, and everywhere we go, we come back to that touchstone of love and support before understanding as an on-ramp for people who don't, to Kellen's point, know trans people. I saw a poll that more Americans think they've seen a ghost than a trans person. But for people who can appreciate a parent's desire to do the best for their kid, and we've actually found some progress. It's not necessarily the tack to take in every instance, and I'm sure when I stop talking, there'll be a lot of really pointed questions about parents' rights and how to counter that, because generally speaking, it's been used in a very bad way against LGBTQ folks more broadly, and specifically against trans kids. So maybe I'll wind down by saying two things. One, our son Neil, who told us he was trans the day we were driving him to college for the first time. Literally the last thing he did before leaving home, which I used to think was sort of funny, but realized over time was actually very sad, because he was afraid of how his folks would react. He's doing great. That was 4 years ago. He's graduated from college. He's living in Philly with his partner. They both hate their jobs. So as a 23-year-old, that's kind of what you want, to be able to live your life with someone you love and be cranky about your job. But otherwise, he's doing great. And now, mind you, if Trump is elected, the Republicans have said that they will make Neil's life really difficult. They may make it impossible for him to get health care. They may make it impossible for him to have legal forms of identification that appropriately indicate his gender. So this is for me, as it is for Kellen, a very deeply personal struggle. And then the other thing I'd say, just to come back to the messages that Adrian laid out, one of our objectives, and I think it's one of Red, Wine, and Blue's objectives that resonates so deeply with me, is we're trying to bring people into the conversation in a way that they understand, and then help them see how extreme the Republicans are. That third message Adrian read about compliance and control was one that she and John came up with in January. And now, if we were to write that message, we would add, in between abortion and healthcare for trans kids, IVF and contraception. I don't know how many examples of their authoritarianism we need before we rise up as a really large majority against them. But we're just trying to arm you guys with some additional tools. With that, I'll stop talking, and with a huge thank you, and turn it back over to the moderators to manage the questions.
Okay, well, actually, I'm going to spotlight all of you, and well, give me just 1 second. I'm going to add Adrian and get Kellen back up here. And then Julie, I know there was one question about people having concerns about kids being outed. I don't know if...
Just realized I was mute. Yes. Someone was concerned about the laws that folks or these legislatures are putting together that are forcing teachers to out students to their parents. Do you have any messaging around that?
Yeah, if I can, I certainly want to hear from Kellen and David as well, but that's one of the things we delved into more deeply. It wasn't reflected in the messages I shared today, but we did delve into it, particularly in our qualitative research. And to be honest, that's one of the places where we really saw a lot of movement, because, well, people, for the most part, when these types of issues are raised, anything with young people, basically they move themselves into role of parent, whether they have kids or they don't have kids. It's very natural to watch people be in a focus group setting and talking about, well, my kids, and you're like, do you have kids? No. Right. So they put themselves in that parental mindset, and they like to think of themselves as great parents, and they may well be. But when one person starts raising, well, what about if a young person lives in a home where they can't talk to their parents. It's not safe to talk to their parents. Then very quickly people get on board and understand that, you know what, maybe having a blanket policy like that is a really bad thing and kids really could get hurt. And the other thing that really came up organically in our groups, this surprised me, to be honest, a bit, was that people were really concerned also about teachers and putting teachers in the position of putting kids in a really unsafe and scary position, knowingly being forced to do that. And also putting that kind of burden on teachers as well. So using kind of messaging, and we'll have something more formal to share with you, but around, listen, we all want our kids to talk to us, but in some homes that's not possible, right? So using that kind of framing, again, we'll get you something more concrete shortly. But people do understand that innately, that not every home is a kind of perfect home where kids can talk to their parents, and that's a very real thing. And people do have real concerns about putting young people in harm's way because of that.
So one of the questions that just popped up in the chat that I think is a great way of framing it, because you were talking about parents' rights messaging, and we know how vile, some of the opposite sides messaging can be. How does this work against that? Folks want to kind of know the offset. How does that work?
Yeah, I can take it, but certainly pass it to my colleagues as well, is, we understand, and David alluded to this as well, that there's complexities in turning something that the right has really tried to kind of commandeer on its head. But it's giving people a little bit of an idea of thinking differently and kind of thinking differently about the mindset that the right has tried to adopt of what parental rights mean, when they're actually pushing an agenda of control, just like our message says, right? They're actually not pushing freedom. They don't want families to have the freedom to do what's best for themselves, for their kids, for their family unit, etc., for their communities. And so we're kind of bringing that out. That being said, and I think I might have seen this out of the corner of my eye in the chat, is we do understand also that we're threading a needle, right? Like there are certainly we have to be careful about how we use that message. And we also are very aware that, with conversion therapy and things like that, it's a balance, in terms of using that messaging. And we're continuing, frankly, to test it through our qualitative and quantitative work. I don't know if David or Kellen want to add in onto that one.
I got a couple of thoughts, Kellen, and then defer to you to the extent that you want to clean up whatever mess I leave. So first thing is we briefed a bunch of Congress people from the LGBTQ Equality Caucus, and Sharice Davids threw her hands up at one point. If you know Sharice from Kansas, she's quite plain spoken. And she said, it's only Democrats that are expected to be consistent. So starting there, I also think that the Republicans have really overplayed their hand on this topic. The states where they have begun the process of legislating against trans people with things like forced outing, with laws governing bathroom use and sports participation, they invariably end up banning healthcare for trans young people. And as far as I'm concerned, that is the most central parental right a parent has, is to take care of their kid, to keep their kids safe. Now, the message Adrian alluded to, and Adrian, I wonder if it's worth dropping the language we've been testing on forced outing into the chat so people can see it, gives you, in conversation with somebody, a way of, first of all, diffusing the rationale behind the forced outing rules. Part of it is that every parent can imagine some family in their community that they know would pose a danger to a kid who was forcibly outed by their teacher. And people also really appreciate that teachers are overburdened and are in this delicate position where they have the trust of a kid and don't want to put them in that awkward position. And it's not just us anecdotally saying that. Our research has really enforced that those are deeply held beliefs. But I think you want to pivot to two things. One is that the campaign, they begin in what appear to be relatively innocuous fashion, pretty quickly become literal bans on the ability of parents, in consultation with their doctors, making healthcare decisions for their kids. And in the words of the Republican legislator in Kansas who voted to sustain Governor Kelly's veto of the latest set of anti-trans bills, this is government overreach. And so we think that's a very powerful response. And then you can pivot back to the messages on that first page. Why are we talking about this stuff? Why are Republicans creating a big panic around trans kids?
Kellen, did you want to say anything?
I think it's been well covered already, though we're happy to dive more into talking about the inherent tensions around parents' rights, because that is a key difference when you think about, for example, abortion and reproductive justice messaging and the role of parents vis-a-vis young people, for example, who are seeking abortion, being often very different from the role of parents of young people who are seeking care related to being transgender. And I guess I'll just say that it just goes to show that there is no one ring to rule them all, right? We're all looking for the one thing, the one answer, the one tool, and even a Swiss Army knife, right? That most multifaceted of tools has multiple pieces to it, has multiple things that you can pull out of it and use, because there is no one tool or one approach that will solve or resolve or speak to every situation. And so if you think about, for example, the experience of transgender people, we might talk about ourselves differently than the ways that you have heard transgender people talked about tonight. This focus on parents, the focus on the longevity of the assessment, the focus on, what are the guardrails? For many transgender people, particularly transgender adults, that's not really the story. The story is about us and how we're living our lives and how, we're perfectly competent adults to make our own choices. And, as the saying goes, make your own choices, pay your own prices. But for young people, and in particular, when we're talking about folks who don't know that much about transgender people and are very, very worried about the situation in which a young person has no support and is making decisions in a vacuum, that's where that emphasis on parents and the longevity of the assessment and the role of healthcare providers makes such a difference. So this is not to say that this is the right thing to say in every conversation or every approach to transgender people or transgender issues, but it is the thing that we know from this research that we have been doing. I say we as if I've been helpful, that Adrienne and her team have been doing, really shows that when you are talking with these folks who don't know that much about trans people beyond what is being fed to them by a certain political ideology, by a certain segment of the media, that the way to get those folks to just calm down for a second and just breathe and listen and empathize, the way into that mindset for them is by emphasizing the role of parents. So again, there are all kinds of nuances, there are all kinds of subtleties. There is no one way to talk about this that speaks to every trans person or every family's lives. But when it comes to the particular situations that we all are grappling with in this year of our Lord 2024, this is the way that we have really found to kind of neutralize some of the immediate knee-jerk reactions that so often make it hard for people to hear those more foundational messages about transgender people are people, and they need healthcare just like anyone else. You have to get through those defenses first, and parents, like David, can be really key, entrees, if you will, or really key folks to open that door for these longer term conversations that do at some point in the future get into nuance.
What I will say kind of segues into people asking about the presentation being available, but what I will ask is, will the verbiage that you did share with us, will that be available for Julie to share in the follow-up email? Because what I saw in your messaging is that it really closely matches the training that we do with Jess McIntosh. She always, shows us how to answer the tough questions, how to talk with folks about different subjects. And your answers that you gave us today really match her messaging. Don't repeat this information, and the way that you have things sandwiched and all that. So this is just really a reinforcement of the way that she, has taught us to answer some, subjects, on other subjects too.
Yeah.
So if that will be helpful, I think, to folks who were asking about the presentation being available afterward. Someone asked, what are the next steps to codify trans rights? Is that anything that we're looking at? I think personally, I live in Ohio, so I think that would be a tough road with our current legislature. We'd have to really flip it in order to make anything like that happen. But, are you looking at that in places where it might be a little easier at all? Just wondering.
Do you want
Ellen?
I was waiting for you to jump in, David, and say, because you've got your C4 hat jammed firmly on your head. Vote, 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 vote. I can't tell you whom to vote for.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, I can ask you, and I can ask you in your networks to vote, because that is the next biggest important thing that really, really, really matters. There is so much damage that has been done at the state level. It will be long and hard and arduous to undo. One of the worst things that could happen next is that we get a presidential administration or we get a Congress that supports these types of bans that, let's be frank, ruin trans people's lives. And we have already seen this Congress put forward any number of anti-trans bills. Pretty much every single appropriations bill to fund the government has had a rider that bans best practice medical care for transgender young people. And there are bills out there at the federal level that would ban care for all trans people, that would ban the use of federal funds, that would ban the use of federal facilities, that would deport healthcare providers who are here on immigrant visas, who provide best practice medical care in accordance with their training and expert standards in the field to transgender people. This is the level of extremism that we are dealing with. And for those of you who know, all of you do, the history of reproductive rights in this country, the Hyde Amendment, that has never actually needed to be really codified into law. It's just an appropriations rider that shows up every year. And it showed up every year for 40 years. And it bans federal funding for abortions for the people who need it the most, people on Medicaid. That is exactly the situation that we are facing if we have an anti-transgender Congress. And don't even get me started about the plan that has been put out there. It's almost 1,000 pages long, Project 2025. It is no secret what they will do to transgender people, what they will do to all of us, is going to be apocalyptic. And so that is the number one place to start, to keep those levers of power out of the hands of those people who have already been very clear that they mean to use government to harm, to hurt, to exclude, and not just to ban healthcare for transgender people, but to destroy our democracy. So there are any number of wonky things that we have in mind. I've got a very long list of, if we have another Biden-Harris term, if we have, Lord willing, a Democratic trifecta on the national level, when we have states that care, there's any number of things that we have been working on that put in place different types of protections that talk about how do you expand the capacity of healthcare systems, right? This is exacerbating in those states that have access to care, bringing young people or young people fleeing states that have bans and seeking care, going from the Mississippi Delta to Minneapolis and seeking care. That's not a panacea. There aren't enough doctors. There aren't enough healthcare systems that are competent in providing care to transgender people. And so there's a lot of work to be done, both in states with bans and states without bans or with express shield laws that protect transgender people, healthcare providers, and parents. But really the first thing that we need to do is we need to win. We need to win big, because they have been very clear that November is a turning point. for trans people, for women, and for this
Yep.
entire country.
I think it's really important to remember that this began as far-right Christian nationalist rhetoric, and it turned into policy very quickly. And I think Kellen's absolutely right that if the Republicans have control of levers of power at the federal level, they will absolutely implement that agenda. They will turn us into Florida. Somebody dropped in the chat, we've got a lot of different messaging resources that have popped up, which is great. And I just want to sort of contextualize the guidance that we've offered tonight. And by the way, we will be able to provide in the next 3 or 4 weeks messaging that includes the forced outing message that Adrian dropped in the chat, which folks are welcome to copy and use. But we'll have more holistic messaging, including that, and we'll share that out through the Red, Wine, and Blue network. And we're happy if you all want to come back on and have a conversation about it. I do want to note that some of the messaging, in particular the last one from Anat Shankar Osorio, which is beautiful messaging, has a very different objective than ours. And to be really sort of reductionist, there's messaging that is intended to change hearts and minds, to move people to a broader and deeper understanding of a topic. This is Anat's great strength. She is reframing how people should think about trans folks. And we all want to live in a world where those messages have everybody nodding their heads. We have a much more modest goal, which is to persuade people to give them an on-ramp so that they look at the Republicans and they think those people are crazy. And so I would go back to this touchstone comment I mentioned in my own remarks, which was we're trying to get people to agree to love and support, perhaps before understanding. And that's a pretty modest goal. I think for those of us who are parents on this call, we can think about our own experience as parents. I don't understand anything any of my kids do, but I love and support them. And I think if we all can bring people to that starting point, we will make possible what Kellen suggested we do, which is to win and win big.
Well, Julie dropped in the chat a couple of resources from Red, Wine, and Blue, our Freedom to Parent program, and our Project 2025 Explainer. Please go there. Please don't give them any more clicks. You'll find the information that you need there. And with that, Julie, I'm going to turn it back over to you in the essence of time and respect of time. And I want to go pop popcorn for 9 o'clock.
Yes, I'm sure most of us are jumping off to watch. I don't know how we're going to describe that, but I wanted to thank so much all of our speakers, Kellen and Adrian and David, for coming and sharing. I did drop some resources. We do have a Project 2025 Explainer, and we have Freedom to Parent, which is, you know, our way of reframing that parents' right narrative. We know that parents' rights is all about taking away actually parents' rights and pushing a political agenda. So we wanted to reframe that as the freedom to parent, giving parents the freedom to do what's right for their families. So you can check out that campaign on our website. We'd definitely love to have you all back to share your further messaging. And again, thank you for coming, and thank you to everybody for joining us tonight. And now go pop your popcorn, pour a drink, whatever you need to do. We'll be turning on the TV here soon. So thank you all and have a really great evening.
Thank you for having us. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Recording.
All right, we're out, guys. Wow. I feel like we definitely got an inside look into the messaging that the Democrats are going to be using. And remember, and I want to do a special welcome to Sarah B. Sarah B found the channel tonight. Sarah, if you think that was crazy, girl, stick around a while. Sarah, that is like, so for anyone new who's never been to a spy stream before, never gone inside a leftist training, if I had to rank that training on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being pretty routine, 10 being the craziest stuff we've ever seen, maybe a 3. Like, that's kind of routine for us. And every once in a while, we stumble upon some of the craziest stuff you will ever see on the internet, Sarah. I swear to God. But that was inside a real leftist training, guys. We now do have a recording of that training. We know what talking points that they are shopping around. I know a lot of you recognize those talking points from the same things that were showing up from leftists in your communities. But this is what the Democrats are doing. And the Republicans do not do this. The Republicans don't do anything like that. Democrats do this stuff all the time, all over the country. And so if you know what they're doing, then you're in a better position to counter it. Now, I wish we could do more of a debrief on that right now, but we have to head into stream number 3 because I will be streaming the debate. I will be streaming it on YouTube. I will also be streaming it on my Rumble channel. It's rumble.com/Carlin, Karlyn. And this stream is going to get started in just a second. I see Jennifer in the chat. Jennifer is going to join me for this stream, and we're going to get this party started. But I'm going to go take just again a little teeny tiny little break, and I will be back to do the debate in probably getting started in like 10-15 minutes or so. And we're just gonna stream it, and I'm not anticipating any problems with YouTube. I think it's going to be fine because they always say there's going to be problems and then there's never any problems. But remember, guys, please make sure you subscribe to my Rumble channel if you have not already. Just in case, let me put the link in the chat and everyone can make sure they're subscribed. And if anything happens to the YouTube stream, you do want to go over to the Rumble stream because that'll still be live. It'll also still be live on X. But of course, that's going to be where we're doing it. Alex with a gifting of 5 memberships at the very end. Let's see who got one. Jason, Kristen, Lady of the Lake, Brooks, and Tinge. Congratulations to everyone who got one of Alex's 5 gifted memberships. Alex, I do really appreciate it. Of course, all super chats and stuff do go to support the channel, guys, and so you help me do what I do. But let me end this stream now. I'm going to go to the little socialist rooms. I'm going to take this the most minor of breaks, and then we will be getting started with debate stream soon. Go grab your drinks, guys. It's going to be a fun night.